minutes of October 12th, non-legislative work session, October 18th, regular meeting, and October 21 non-legislative. If so, is there any motions to amend? Yes, sir.
The October 21st.
Ooh. You want to split them up?
Motion that we approve the non-legislative session of October 12th and regular session of October 8th.
Okay, motion was made by Alderman Campbell, seconded by Alderman Galloway to adopt the minutes of the October 12th non-legislative work session and the October 18th. The October 18th regular session, legislative session. All those in favor? That is 5. All right. Motion was made by Alderman Poston, seconded by Alderman Galloway to approve October 21 non-legislative work session. All those in favor? And that's all right. Perfect. No ceremonial matters this evening. Scheduled visitors and guests. The Ozark Chamber of Commerce monthly report, Mr. Williams. Thank you. We're good. Whenever you're ready.
The green light. Good evening, and thank you for having me back, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. Greg Williams with the Ozark Chamber. It's good to see you and visit again. Just a brief overview, kind of a report. 20 days from today, November 20th, right? We have the Christmas parade, bigger and better. Have a wonderful opportunity to really raise the bar in execution of that event, and hopefully the participants and the attendees, families, et cetera, will have a wonderful time with how we've expanded the parade route, entertainment zones throughout, and really looking forward to a successful day and just praying for better weather than we experienced today. Hope we have a nice sunny afternoon. Would like to express my appreciation for your involvement in the recent salute to community. Your good mayor and city administrator both presented the city's priorities, objectives for the upcoming year, as well as some recent success stories, and it was very well received. So thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Steve. The event was a sellout. We had 148 in attendance at First Baptist Church that evening. Heard presentations from not only the city, but from Christian County, the Ozark Public Schools, and as well as the chamber. Had good feedback, and people were very appreciative of what they heard and very enthusiastic about various organizational plans and priorities as we move into the upcoming calendar year. The red carpet teachers welcome is scheduled for 7:45 a.m. tomorrow. Would love to see some of your faces there at the Ozark High School cafeteria. It's an event that was originally scheduled for very early August prior to the school year, and the school board at that time had to make the unfortunate decision to postpone the event due to COVID protocol. And we're looking forward. They had 150 teachers and new administrators and staff. I was unaware that there are 900 employees in that school district. 150 of these folks are new to the district, and that'll be a neat opportunity for us over breakfast, meet and greet tomorrow morning, again at the high school to celebrate their entry into the public school market and thank them for the impact they have on our kids. The chamber had a very productive board planning retreat a couple of weeks ago. Full day session, looking forward to the next calendar year of what we can do better and more efficiently, and maybe some new programming. We'd be happy to share the results of that planning retreat as it pertains to our role in community development, community betterment, and especially in tourism, the trade and promotion of capturing existing visitors to the marketplace through a number of marketing and public relations opportunities that we know are out there. Discussions are also underway. Many of you may have heard through the grapevine that there's a tremendous opportunity for the chamber and to rebrand and re-engineer the Carl G. Hefner Enterprise Center from an operational as well as structure, governance, and financial perspective. We want to rebrand and get back to its original purpose. And they've kind of gotten away over the last couple of years from the original purpose of a true business incubator, of identifying fledgling entrepreneurs in the community with a good idea and a business plan and ready to go to market, but just need that shared office space, that cheaper maybe than normal rent, and grow their business, and hopefully within a 2 to 3 year period exit and go to the market and do wonderful things. The chamber's going to play, and both boards, the Enterprise Center board as well as the chamber board, have heard the recommendations from staff relative to future operations, structure, and branding of that enterprise. And over the course of the next several weeks, maybe a couple of months, we'll be pleased to bring a formal report to the Board of Aldermen for you to provide some input, thought, and opinion relative to where that enterprise goes. There's some tremendous things happening. We're fully leased, some outstanding tenants doing some good things, and we just believe that there's much more opportunity on the horizon for those good things to continue in the community, in job creation and new capital investment, as well as the tax revenues that result from that investment. So we will be back soon to provide a more formal report, probably first quarter of 22, and look forward to your input. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, wonderful. Mr. Gardner, first reading of bills. Motion was made by Alderman Gardner, second by Alderman Campbell, to place bill number 3310 on its first reading by title and description only. All those in favor?
An ordinance amending the municipal code of the city of Ozark, Missouri, chapters 700 water system rules and regulations and 710 waste disposal and sewer use to address requirements for connection to city utilities and approving changes to the city of Ozark design standards, drawing details and construction specifications for public improvements to allow holding tanks.
All right, you got the lead, or? Okay, Mr. McCart.
Public Works Director to come up, and he's got a presentation. I just wanted to really just start out by saying that, times change, and over the years, we have found the need to modify our ordinances, not just with this one, but just with many, as you've seen over the last few months. So this is one of those ordinances that we feel needed to be updated to deal with the current situations that we're dealing with now. And it gives us an opportunity to dive back into those ordinances and figure out, how can we best serve our customers that are our current customers and maybe our future customers as well. And so you're going to see what that is tonight. So it's about annexations and connectivity to our public sewer and water system. So, John.
So I'll give a brief presentation on how we got to this point. So we had a couple of parcels that came about a few months ago. We realized that we had an issue with servicing these with city water and utility, or city water and sewer. If you look at the map, you'll see that the red indicates that there's 30 lots that have limited utilities, which that means that the utility for water is 300 feet or further away from their parcel. And the same thing with sewer, which shows that there's 80, and then tier C, which means that neither one of those utilities are within 300 feet of that parcel. So again, these parcels are already annexed into the city with limited utilities. One of the parcels that really brought this to our attention of how we can work around and not tell these developers that they cannot develop or do something with their parcel was this one right here, and that's at the corner of Highway W and 14. And if you see, both utilities are roughly around 2,500 feet away from the parcel that we're talking about with the asterisk. So it got us looking into our design standards and how can we allow these developers to move forward. And one thing that Jeremy always talks about, tools in our tool bag, is working with the design standards to allow us to have holding tanks. We have talked to Missouri Department of Natural Resources and Christian County Health Department. They are both on board with what we're proposing tonight. And that's to allow us to use holding tanks within the city limits on case-by-case basis. That doesn't mean that anybody can come in and use a holding tank. Somebody can't put in 400 homes in a subdivision and all have holding tanks. We are still not allowing septic tanks. Septic tanks are still not permitted in the city of Ozark. Even if we wanted to do that, the Department of Natural Resources would not, they would be completely opposed to that. So I will give you a brief description on the difference between the two. At the top, that's a septic system. It leaches back into Mother Earth. We're a holding tank on the bottom. It just goes into a tank. It would still be pumped out by a truck and then taken to a facility to be treated. No different than the sewer that's going through a gravity line. So in the design standards, it would, to meet those requirements to get a holding tank, you would have to demonstrate an environmental need for that holding tank. The city would determine whether or not it's economical, feasible for the city and the developer to extend the municipal public sanitary sewer, which is the gravity sewer. And then it would take the approval of the Public Works Director. So the other part of this is how do we keep ourselves from moving forward and getting more cases of this and annexing into the future? So currently, if someone comes in, they want to annex into the city of Ozark, and they want to connect to the water system, if they're compact and contiguous and they connect to the water, they annex into the city. Well, the sewer, on the other hand, could be over 300 feet away. And when their septic fails, then that's their responsibility, because we don't allow holding tanks to extend at that resident's expense, that gravity sewer, however many feet, that could be thousands, hundreds of thousands, 30,000, however much to get that to their residents. So what we're trying to propose in the ordinance as well is to say that to be annexed into the city, you have to meet 3 criteria: compact and contiguous, and the connection of both city utilities, which is sewer and water. No, that's what we're proposing tonight. Currently, if you connect to one utility and are compact and contiguous, you would then be annexed into the city, whether or not that sewer or water is 300 feet away, at which time their well or septic fails, and that would be their responsibility to extend that at the resident's expense. So we're trying to not, by leaving them in the county, it's allowing them to, how do I put this, not have to necessarily follow our guidelines, as, it leaves them open to options, repairing a septic tank, doing something with their well, whereas if they're in the city of Ozark, they're more limited on what they can do for their utilities, if that makes sense. So we're trying to protect the residents, work with them more, and not pigeonhole ourselves and putting ourselves into a quarter where we're spending X amount of dollars to provide these services to city residents as well. So that's kind of the brief stuff, of the design standards and the ordinance change that we're requesting tonight. So I'll answer any questions.
Mr. Poston.
I got a couple, actually. Why, the map that you showed earlier?
Which one?
Jump back there real quick.
This,
All the way back. First slide, I think. It shows that property that's north of Waterford. Didn't we de-annex that a few years ago?
no, the parcel that was de-annexed was actually just the other side of Highway NN. And it was, I think, about half the size of that parcel.
So that's gonna be my first question. Why not de-annex this?
I would refer to Ms. Callaway on why we have to follow to de-annex a parcel.
There are state statutes that guide the city on when you can de-annex a property, and we're still looking into all the possibilities for that. But presently, the annexation statute references that a de-annexation request has to be filed within 5 years of annexation if the ordinance is brought forward.
But even, it doesn't sound like, if we were to do this today, would that parcel meet all of our requirements for annexation?
No. If you change the ordinance today, that parcel would not meet the requirement.
Under current law, I mean.
At current, it would. That's why it's annexed in current.
Under your position is we can't de-annex this, or at least you don't think we can.
The law that I'm aware of and referencing that I believe maybe staff had talked about previously was that an action for de-annexation would be brought within 5 years of the actual annexation. I'm not sure of the history of this property or others, but we can look into this as staff and provide a more solid answer to you at another time.
The next question is, do we do ongoing inspections of holding tanks?
So currently, we don't allow holding tanks. There is some that were brought in back years and years ago, and we monitor them and we make sure that they're pumped on regularly, no different than a grease trap that a restaurant room. So yes,
What is, several times in your document here, you referenced that they would be allowed for an environmental need. What environmental need would trump, would you get a holding tank instead of a sewer?
so what we're talking about is if a septic was to fail and their septic, because currently we do have people that are annexed into the city of Ozark because they connected to water, but didn't connect to our sewer, and their sewer is, say it's over 300 feet away and they have to get required easements to get that gravity to their parcel. Environmental need would it be better to have a holding tank or repair that septic tank? It'd be cheaper and it would be better for the environment to allow them to utilize a holding tank.
Okay. And then the last question was, you laid out the criteria for when the property would have to connect, but it doesn't say the time frame. So once a property's met the criteria, what's the time frame for them to?
So what we would do is we would have them sign a consent to annex, say they were compact and contiguous and they connected to our water system. We would require them to do a consent to annex and say that once the sewer is available within 300 feet, and we use 300 feet because that's our USA agreement that we use with the county currently. And once that time comes, then they would be required to annex in, no different than, or same as our consent to annex now. If it becomes compact and contiguous, then we would go back and say, here's a recorded document, and now it's, and start the annexation process with them.
Well, but more than the annexation was that once they met the criteria, they were required, once the utilities within 300 feet, they're required to hook up.
Mhm.
So what's the time frame for that? I mean, if we run back out there tomorrow, they got to hook up on Monday. I mean,
That's kind of that's the way we're moving forward. If it's a year from now, or if it's 10 years from now. So, I mean, because it's hard to determine when sewer is going to be available in certain areas, so it's a case by case basis.
But the expectation is that they will do it very quickly once the criteria is met.
Yeah, the annexation process will start, and then they would have to start working on the plans to get that connected.
Okay. Thanks, John.
John, I had problems following the point of the slide that had the asterisk on it.
This one right here?
Yeah, what is that show me?
So if you see to the far left of the screen, you'll see the blue and green lines. That's our city utilities. And that's as far as they extend to the east on Highway W. So the parcel with the asterisk is 2,500 feet away from the nearest city utility. So to ask that developer to go out there, depending on what they develop, is asking a lot of them. If you're asking that developer if he's wanting to do a commercial development that's very minute, it's very hard to ask him to extend the city services 2,500 feet. So we're just trying to find a way to work with developers moving forward and allowing them to have holding tanks, cuts down on costs, and having the entire expense of city utility expenses roll over to the developer.
A holding tank is something that has to service more than one building, or can service one building?
It would service one building. Because what would happen, they would submit a plan for a holding tank. We would review that plan through the Public Works and our third-party engineer, and we would determine the amount of sewage that would come off of that development, because each one would be different case by case. And then we would determine the size of that holding tank that would be required in the schedule for pumping that.
Are holding tanks for residential, commercial, are there limitations there?
No, but there's different applications for the need of it. So if it's commercial, it'd be different than, say, a residential.
And the developer in that slide would have issues because our present ordinances do not allow him to use septic tanks or her to use septic tanks.
Correct. Yes. Our design standards call it out, and so does our ordinance.
So people may have existing septic systems.
Mhm.
They're okay.
Yes.
But those people that are developing their land, they cannot put them in as of today, those septic systems.
Yes, currently, we do not allow new septic tanks, nor are we asking to allow new septic tanks, just holding tanks. Holding tanks just hold the sewage until it's pumped out of it with a truck. A septic system leaches back into the earth. So we still do not want to permit that, and like I was saying earlier, the health department wouldn't support that, nor would the Department of Natural Resources.
When you say they would not support that, what does that mean?
They would not. So the design standards that I'm bringing forward to you guys tonight would go to Department of Natural Resources. If they read that language, then they would not approve it, and then we could not implement that in the community.
So they can veto?
Yes,
Use of-
the state has the final say.
Under this ordinance, for somebody who already has a septic system, we pass this ordinance, they're not within 300 feet. They do nothing, they can still continue on.
So the way we handle existing septic tanks, so as a septic tank fails, if it's within 300 feet, we require them to hook on. And at that time, they have to annex, or if they're currently annexed, we don't ask them to annex if they're already, so they make that connection. But with this, if without changing the design standards, if a septic tank fails and they're currently in the city limits, we don't allow septics or holding tanks, they have to extend that city sewer to their parcel. And that could sometimes be very, very costly. And for a single family residence to pay that amount, it's hard to tell them that they can't, there's no other way.
And then when they're, if you have a holding tank, a truck comes over and pulls it out. I'm just not familiar with this at all. How often does that happen for one that's built for a house or?
So typically, there's one that we currently do that we pump and we charge the person for it. And I think we do it twice a month for them. But it depends on, again, the size of the facility. Is it commercial? Is it residential? But again, we'll go back to our third-party engineers, and based upon the size of the tank and the amount of use will determine how often it has to be pumped. And then we will monitor that to make sure it's getting done correctly, because we want to make sure that doesn't get pumped, and then we end up with sewage on the ground, because we're liable for that if we don't monitor that well.
So when you say we pump it out,
so the one I'm speaking of, the city of Ozark currently pumps it, but it wouldn't be required for the resident, if we move forward with this, to have the city pump it. They can have, there's other companies that could pump it for them and take it to a facility for treatment. And again, we would just make sure that it's getting taken care of.
and what is the fee for that for, say, a 2,000 square foot building? Or?
Honestly, Bruce, I can't give you a cost estimate on that. I think it just depends on the rate changes, the size of the tank, how many loads, fuel costs, it varies so much.
I mean, is it affordable for?
Oh, yeah, it's not astronomical by no means. No, I can promise you it's cheaper than extending gravity sewer line over 300 feet.
Of course. And so what you're saying is we have a rule that prevents septic systems. We can't allow septic systems. This change is designed to allow for holding tanks as a way out for landowners that are far away from
Yes.
sewer lines.
Yes.
Okay, I don't think I understood that was the point of it. Okay, thank you.
If I could go back to something that Mr. Poston brought up, those parcels that we're talking about, most of those, if not all of those, were annexed back in early 2000. So there was a big boom in annexation back then, and I think we didn't understand, we kind of thought that everything was going to spread out. So I just want to clear that, because we were talking about annexations, but a lot of those were done, 15 years ago or so.
So what you're, I'm sorry, if I may, so what you're trying to do is to open development for land within the city that would not otherwise be developable.
Current land that is annexed into the city of Ozark, we are trying to open it up for development and to allow them to have more opportunities for development and not restrict them so much. We do not want to keep annexing pieces of property into the city that would require a holding tank or a private well. What we're trying to do is fix the issue at hand that's of the parcels that are currently annexed into the city. And that's why we're asking to change the ordinance as well, so we don't continue to say shoot ourselves in the foot and keep annexation property into the city of Ozark that has these problems that would require a holding tank or a private well.
The reason why I ask, a constituent approached me and expressed concern that this was going to restrict use of land, but what you're saying is no, actually it allows for the opportunity to be developed where our rules would not allow it right now.
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mrs. Alderman.
So our holding tanks, does it work in a development? Like if they want to develop the property, they put all these holding tanks in the ground?
So the way the language was written was a case-by-case basis that would allow the Public Works Department to review each parcel that's requesting a holding tank. We would not allow that to take, if you had 15, 40 homes come in and allow them all to have holding tanks. What we're trying to do is work for small lots and residential lots, or even small commercial lots that are currently hamstringed with that can't have anything done to it because of our current code. So if someone was to come in and look at building 200 acres or 40 acres, you know, we would require them to extend the city services out to that parcel.
Can you do that though legally? I mean, can you say yes to the 2 or 3 people and then no to the developer that wants to do 20 homes?
So
If I may, I just wanted to clear up something. So when we go back to the map, if you wouldn't mind, John.
Yeah.
And we're really dealing with what has happened was that we realized that, again, years ago, whatever the thought path process was, there were properties that were annexed into the city. We didn't have a requirement. We didn't even have a consent to annex process at that time. We didn't use that tool at all. People would just annex property, sometimes for a reason, sometimes for no reason, just because they thought maybe that might make their property more marketable or something. But at the time, there may have been a thought that there was water and sewer coming, or maybe one was there, but the other one wasn't there. So what we're really dealing with is we're trying to deal with an existing issue. So the existing issue is that we have annexed property that is not close to water and sewer, not feasible for the person that wants to sell their property or develop on their property to really bring water and sewer to that property, not for the city or for the property owner. And so we're dealing with an existing situation of property annex that have no public sewer. And so we're saying, you know, what we want to do is we recognize for whatever reason, these people are kind of stuck. We've sort of put them on an island. We've invited them in, but you don't get any public water and sewer. And it's not because of anybody's fault, it's just simply not there. So we're trying to go back to those that are already in, or that may be able to say, like John said earlier, listen, you're compact and contiguous and water's across the street, but sewer's a mile away. You know, and the way our ordinance works now is it's kind of an all or nothing sort of thing. If you got to take it all or you don't get to come in. Well, that doesn't always work. I mean, that sounds great, but you can't just close the door like that. So there may be, I'll use an environmental, you asked about environmental. We have a river. We have a floodplain. People have septic systems in that floodplain. We want to eliminate all the septic systems we can by our river and our floodplain all along our riparian corridors. We want them out of there. Well, so you may have somebody that's got a septic system that's not in the city, but they're hooked to water for whatever reason in the past. That's just the way it was. Uh-oh, my septic system failed. Now I want to connect to city sewer, and they can. Maybe sewer's there now. Well, we don't want them to put that septic back, even though they're maybe out there and they may be able to. We want to have the option to take a case-by-case basis and look at that and say, this is a chance for us to eliminate that septic. Let's do it right now and get them either connected or put the holding tank in, which is a better and more affordable temporary solution until sewer can get there. The septic leaching out, and I mean, they have septic fields. You've heard of those, you know what those are. That's putting it back into the ground. So anyway, we're kind of trying to deal with really an existing issue and trying to figure out a way that we can find that balance between making sure that we preserve what we need to do, which is keep the DNR happy under our permits to say, we're not going to let you have more septic tanks in your service area, city. But at the same time, allow for people that have, for whatever reason, annexed their property into the city that really have no other option to move forward with it because our code was so restrictive. So really, I think trying to find that balance.
Well,
Okay.
thank you. Well, like North Park, okay, what does he not have? He has water?
So, I mean, he's submitted construction plans to extend the services onto his parcel. And that's what we would request if somebody was to come in at a 40-acre tract to build homes.
Right.
So at that time, whenever they come forward with annexation, it would be their understanding that they would have to extend the services to that subdivision.
So he's not gonna put in 100 holding tanks?
No, we wouldn't
He's
permit that.
gotta go, he's gotta connect. the sewer.
Correct, yes. Same thing with that southern development that.
Right,
yeah.
because that, we just annexed that in
Yeah.
last year and it's
Like I said,
huge.
you know, like, we keep going back to it, but it would be a case by case. It wouldn't be a free for all. It would be in instances where, again, where we find it, you know, I have these bullet points here.
And so that's kind of my question too, is legally, can you do that? Can you say to North Park, no, you can't come in with a bunch of holding tanks, you've got to connect. But to the individual person, we can say, oh yeah, you can go ahead and get a holding tank. I mean, yes,
The way that the language is drafted for both the use of a well or the use of a holding tank in the exception is that those two people won't be similarly situated that you're using in your example. You would have a developer who's building a residential large subdivision, and you have someone who can demonstrate an environmental need as to why their septic is failing. They are going to have to make a change, and right now our code does not allow them to replace that septic system. So by allowing them to use a holding tank, we are addressing the environmental need, whereas there was no environmental need represented in the development of a new subdivision.
okay. So there's no need for me to have that concern.
I do not believe there's a concern because we have separated the two parties and they have to demonstrate that need, and it will be reviewed by Public Works.
Okay, and then you're also wanting to change the code. So in the future, annexing in would have to meet all three criteria, right?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
In terms of execution with the 300-foot standard, so a sewer line is extended out and say there are several properties that are together.
Mhm.
They look like maybe a subdivision maybe, but they're all septic. Sewer line extends out, so one's got to connect, and the way this works is, well, the others will kind of in domino be all connecting as well, because the easements will be extended and the sewer line is extended to where everybody that's next to it will be on sewers. Is that how it executes?
Correct, yes. Now, if they're not annexed into the city and they have a septic system that's working fine and it's within 300 feet, we won't go out there and require them to hook up to our, but at the time that septic's failing and that's within 300 feet, then yes, we will ask them to connect to the city services. And so would the health department. The health department would not permit a new septic if it's within 300 feet. And that's why we continually use the 300 feet as the limited.
additional questions? Mr. Gardner?
John, in case of subdivision like main addition or rainy addition, where there have been, or there were, the entire subdivisions were built with septic tanks, but there are a number of people now that are hooked to sanitary sewer because it's available. If there were a situation where somebody's septic tank failed and they were over 300 feet away, but there were in between them and the access point to sewer, there were other people that were whose septic tanks had not failed, but were on septic tanks. If one person had to foot the bill for that 300 feet, and the other people that were in between that could use that service but didn't need it at the time, is there any way that the person that paid for that initially could recoup some of their cost at the point where the other people may need to hook on?
So we've had that come up a few times, and that question's been brought up by some residents in that area you're describing. And what we do is we try to get them all in contact with each other and they work together, or Jeremy's even got with them and discussed a TDD, or not TDD, a NID, a neighborhood improvement district to work together and to do something that the whole community in that, or that area could utilize that and get it service to everybody, and it would be a little bit cheaper for everybody on the front. So that's kind of the direction we steer them whenever that comes about. So.
Mr. Campbell?
I just want to make sure I understand one thing. Even if we, the city of Ozark, wanted to allow septic tanks, septic systems, am I right that we couldn't because of the health department, DNR would not allow it?
So if
them
a parcel is within the city of Ozark currently, and their septic fails, they are required to hook onto city sewer services, because we will not allow septics within the community inside the city limits, nor will the health department. And DNR does not allow us to, because it's not written in our design standards.
So DNR nor the health department would allow it even if we did.
Now, if they're in the county, they could present an argument to the health department and request it, but the health department is going to look at we provide them maps of where our system runs. And if they see that it's within 300 feet, they would go back to that resident in the county and say, no, you're within this many feet, and you would have to connect to city services.
Okay.
Mr. Galloway?
I had a question for Amanda. Just on a wording on section 710.030, paragraph D. Where it's talking about the 300-foot standard. So it says buildings, property situated within the availability of the city's public sewer system and abutting on utility easement or right of way, which is now located or may in the future be located, access to the public sanitary sewer of the city. On the may in the future language, is that what is intended there? I know I've sprung it on you.
No, that's all right. This isn't language it's already existing in the code, so I'm just reviewing it because the language we're adding is underlined and the language we're removing is stricken. So this language predates my amendments, so I'm not sure of the original intent. However, it does look like it would extend that requirement if the sewer is brought to them at the time that the city extends the water main or the sewer main. Then at that time, if they're within 300 feet, they would need to connect. So in essence, the ordinance, when it was adopted, they couldn't just freeze everything in time and say, if you're within 300 feet of an existing sewer or water line, you have to connect if we move our facilities further.
Yeah, I think I agree with your interpretation, and I guess the way it was written, it might have been a little more clear if they eliminated the word may and just said in the future. But as long as we interpret it that way, that's all my questions.
Mr. Post?
Yes, this is just a comment, not a question, pet peeve of mine. We've passed a number of ordinances the last few years that have some sort of at the discretion of a public works director or some staff member, those make me nervous. I know we hire professionals and we expect you to bring your expertise to bear on the issues that we have. And so hamstringing you by giving you a really defined set of rules, I understand that causes problems, but we're also putting a lot of onus back on staff where pressure could be applied to them one way or another to get them to do things because we've given them a tremendous amount of flexibility to make these types of decisions. And so if we don't always put things in the law, that doesn't mean that as staff that we shouldn't be coming up with policies to document what our decision-making framework is going to be so that we have something to refer to so that we don't get into issues like Heather mentioned where you approve this person and not this person and you can't back it up with some sort of reasoned framework for you making those decisions.
And I think that that's what we do in the review process is so you take sidewalk buyouts, for instance, if we have somebody that requests a buyout or they request that they don't meet the criteria to build sidewalks, we make they develop a request and then we take that request review and we submit that into, we have a program now called SmartGov and all those things are documented. So if somebody is requesting a holding tank in the future, if we choose to adopt this, then we would take documentation of the process that we got to there, whether it's third-party reviews, things that maybe the DNR requested of the development or the health department, and provide all that documentation through there. It wouldn't be something where we just, yes, go ahead and put a holding tank into the ground and there was no documentation of how we got to that point.
I think what I was trying to get at was, is if we pass an ordinance that says that we're leaving a decision to the discretion of somebody, I think there probably ought to be an unwritten expectation that some sort of policy, internal policy will follow that to document that, what that framework is.
John said it. That's why we're, getting new software and advancing our software so we can do a better job of documenting things. Trust me. Sometimes when you go back, I know Ms. Calloway knows this. Sometimes when you go back and you say, I wonder why the city did that 25 years ago. You may not find anything. And so we live that far too often. And so, yes, documentation, processes, developing forms, and putting all that into the system is definitely important. We get it, and we know the importance of it. So we are doing that.
Any further questions? Is anyone in the audience here to speak on this bill? Step forward, give your name and address to the city clerk, please.
My name's Shannon Todd. I'm address 3312 Wingfoot Drive, Nixa. I'm representing the seller, Elise Crane, on the property that was currently located at the corner of Highway 14 and Highway W. I have some questions that maybe you guys can answer, or maybe you can answer. First off, going back, when this property was annexed in, it was ordinance 08-009, signed by Mayor Don Watts. It says, whereas the city is able to furnish normal municipal services to said area within a reasonable time after annexation. That was 13 years ago. I don't know what the time frame that they were referring to. And of course, back then the city was growing south. And they were talking about a city park going out towards J at one time. So I know they were planning a lot of development that way, but right now the closest utilities are half a mile away. So a couple of questions I have is, when this was annexed, do you know if septic systems were allowed in the property with the city code at that time? And if so, could it be grandfathered in? We were discussing with the buyer, and the buyer is concerned about, we obviously, to get the highest use and be able to use the property, a holding tank would be wonderful, but they said it's going to cost them about $400 a month to pump out. So we were looking about $5,000 a year for the buyer to be able to utilize that. So that's an expense that will happen year after year after year. And so they were inquiring with us as to whether or not they could have a septic system. And so the question is was the ordinances said that it could be grandfathered in? The tract of land is over 5 acres. Which I know that for on-site septic systems, a minimum 3 acres is required by Christian County. So it exceeds the minimum requirements for an on-site septic system. And I understand that DNR would require, has their own rules. And I don't know how that works with cities. But obviously, in the part that, if they were able to have that, they, would understand that they'd be within, once the utility is within 300 feet, they'd be able to connect. Another question I have is, with utilities talking about coming within 300 feet of a septic system, if a said property is in lower elevation than where the sewer line coming to it would be, would the owner have to foot the expense of having to put a lift station in to comply with the ordinance to pump it uphill? That was a question that see if we can get answered. And then the other thing is, if they were not allowed to have a septic system in there and we're having to deal with the $500 a month, is this something that the city would offset the cost of, since this property is annexed in so long ago, but the utilities that were promised when it was annexed in were never delivered? And so that was a question I have for you guys, and I know Elise would be concerned about it, but we're trying to get a property that obviously has kind of been a sore spot. There was a different administration. The city was moving a different direction at that time, but we're trying to get it where it can still be used. We have a church interested in buying the property and utilizing it, which would be a great use for that location there. And it would go in with, the other properties around their church would be a good neighbor for them. So, with this, we're looking for, other options that they could use. And like I said, trying to find a way that, first thing is, the holding tank, but the second one would be, I know that the city would allow it if they had a septic system sitting there on the grounds, they could tie into it, but they don't. But, my thought was, if they're allowing ones that's an existing system as per 710.04A, why would they not allow a system that's brand new that meets all today's modern standards to protect the environment? And so that's the questions we have, because obviously we'd like to be able to get the property to be utilized. We'd like to support our seller in this and be able to find a way to make it so that way the buyer is satisfied as well.
I don't know if we have answers for those types of questions. I think that would take more legal research. I mean, to ask the city tonight whether or not they would allow it, it's not allowed. And so because it's not allowed, we'd have to research as to whether or not there was a solution to allow some avenue to get us there. So right. I think that the questions are good questions. I think they're fair questions. I think that staff's going to need some time, if this is the direction that they receive from the board, to go research these things and bring back to us some answers so that we have an understanding of what options really exist. Like you said.
And I know the property, like I said, if it was outside the city limits and was not annexed, it would meet the guidelines that they would need to actually have a sewer system. I mean, septic system installed, because it's more than 3 acres to be able to do that. And so it isn't like a half-acre lot that some house has. That would be very difficult to achieve.
Just for clarity, and we can research this too. Is it also an option? And I don't know if this is even possible on the research we've done so far, but if it could be de-annexed, is that also an acceptable option too? Because it doesn't need to be in the city. It's not benefiting the potential user. There's not going to be water, there's no water and sewer there, and just
I think that would be satisfactory.
Okay. I want to know, I don't want to do the research if we don't need to. I'm just saying it.
Because I know that
it's another option.
Yeah. And I know that, like I said, this was done 13 years ago, and the city was going different directions at that time. And so it just, that's what the questions we had. And obviously I know that you have the bill for tonight about the holding tank, but I was looking at, also other directions because of the cost of having that pumped out regularly. It would be a lot for a church to be able to handle.
And I do want to make this point, just so the board knows that when we were researching this, and that's why we created the map, and we asked ourselves, we had 3 or 4 or 5 different situations that popped up, all a little bit different. And so staff was like, we need to take a step back. We need to look at each one of these. We need to read our ordinances, and we need to figure out what is it that we're trying to achieve? What we're trying to achieve is to assist those properties that are either annexed already and don't have the services, or maybe they have one or the other. And we had all these different scenarios going on. And when we were talking to who we thought was going to be the developer of the property that we're talking about now, this ordinance that we're talking about would have solved the problem as we knew it at the time. So I'm not putting that on anybody else. I just wanted the board to know that we thought we were going down the right path, and I still believe we are. And I think there's flexibility in this. I think it's balanced. I think we protect the city, we comply with the DNR and the health department, but at the same time, we're being more flexible in the situations that I feel like are no harm to the city. I think it's being a good steward with the decision-making that we have and the authority we have to work with those people. But we just thought that we were fixing that problem, and just now we learned that it may be a different, it was church, which we're fine.
And it was, and like I said, it was a concern that was brought up. I mean, obviously, one would, the holding tank would solve it, but we all know it may be a long time before we get city sewer out there, and water, because I mean, it probably cost over $1 million to get there.
Yeah.
And so
it was just different. We just didn't know. So I think this is still a good bill, and I fully support it, and I'm really happy with the way it came out. And I information and we didn't know.
I agree, and like I said, I agree with that. I just, but also wondering if there's other opportunities as well to maybe change the bill a little bit, or find other ways around. And like I said, not knowing what the DNR requires, and but the situation with the size of this property as opposed to a city lot, what options will we possibly have, or possibility of even de-annexation, since I don't know if, because it was written that way, that with the ordinance, that it was any way to change that. So thank you.
Mr. Galloway.
It just seems like, sorry, it's almost like it's almost, well, I think this legislation doesn't impact that property at all. I mean, I think the concern that had been expressed was, well, we can't put septic there under this bill, but we were already there. So I think the concern is this doesn't do enough. On the other hand, for a lot of other citizens, it would be helpful, and I'd be willing to entertain additional protections to the extent they're lawful over and above this. I don't know that we need to delay legislation on this, but it does seem to me, I would hate to own property and think I could sell it and thought that the utilities would be there and can't ever sell it. I do understand that. But that's my 2 cents for what it's worth.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
First, I want to say I support the development of the property. I don't want you to misread what I'm getting ready to say as I'm against it. But I would, in answer to Mr. Todd's question about the septic system going in, I don't think it would be allowed, because there's verbiage in here that says if there's already a septic system there even, and it fails, you can't replace it with another septic system. So I think just by that virtue that, but I do want you to do the research. I'm not saying that, and I hope we come up with something. That's it.
And to Mr. Galloway's point, we thought this was going to fix 100% of the current issues that we were dealing with. It gets 95% of them, but we just didn't know, that this was going to tweak. So that's okay. That happens a lot of times with ordinances. You think you're going to do it all, and some circumstance comes along and you went, well, I didn't think about that, so it is a good ordinance, and I think we are, I think it's a great balance for again, 95% of the situations. It just was one that we didn't know about. So,
Mr. Gardner?
Well, this is uncovered a situation that a lot of us here didn't know about it. And I wasn't on the board at the time, but I think that this current ordinance, it's 3110, 3310, I think it provides a solution for many potential uses, maybe not the church, but the church isn't involved in the ordinance. This is an ordinance that applies not to a specific use, but to future uses similar to this. And so for that reason, I don't think there's any reason to delay it, that we should just go ahead and proceed with it.
Okay. Yeah, and I got it. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I was getting to you, but you're ready to go. So go ahead.
I had this letter all written up. My name is Sandy Carnes. I actually am representing the church. So I'm a Nixa resident. Well, thank you for letting me in.
All right. We just name and address.
Sandy Carnes, 622 North Maplewood Hills Road, Nixa.
Perfect. Thank you.
Speaking on behalf of the church, this is not a church that was planted. It's one that grew very small. It's someone, Pastor Buddy, God called him to start a church, and him with some other people did. So it's a very small congregation. I think right now they have around 70. I know that their desire is to move to the property that's being talked about. To put a financial burden of at least $400 a month once they get there, it's more than they can probably do. They will never be a James River. Well, I can't say that. God has plans, right? But it's a small church. And so where this may be good for some places, I don't know that would work for this land and this buyer, because I can't see them be able to do everything you guys are requesting. So I guess I would ask that you consider a solution for this particular property, whatever that looks like. So, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Anyone else here to speak on this topic? Hearing none. Any other board comments? Mr. Gardner?
Yes, thank you. I think this bill expedite this.
Yes, sir.
This forward. So if there are no other comments.
Well, Mr. McCart's wanting to state something.
So at the very beginning, whenever we talked about a couple of parcels that came and brought forward to the city staff about this, there's a couple of residents currently that are dealing with a failing well and also a failing septic tank, and they cannot connect to the city services currently without annexation to the city, which then will deem them in the same boat that these properties that we're discussing tonight, where they only are serviceable with one utility. So by expediting it only speeds up the process of providing sewer for one and water for another one. And that's why we're asking for it to be expedited.
Okay. Mr. Gardner?
All right, I move to put bill 3310 on second reading.
Motion was made by Alderman Gardner, second by Alderman Poston, to place bill number 3310 on its second reading by title and description only. All those in favor?
An ordinance amending the municipal code of the city of Ozark, Missouri, chapter 700, water system rules and regulations, and 710, waste disposal and sewer use, to address requirements for connection to city utilities and approving changes to the city of Ozark design standards, drawing details and construction specifications for public improvements to allow holding tanks.
All right, any further comments from the board? Mr. Campbell?
Vote to approve this, but I understand it's only for holding tanks, so it's only going so far right now. Does it make sense to approve it for holding tanks? And then I guess it would be Rick's thing and John's and Jeremy's to go a little further with it and see if we can get a septic tank or a septic system or something like that. I don't want to hold them up if they want to choose to go with the holding tank system.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I want to try to help them if we can do a little research and find a way that we can help them. Does that make sense to you?
I think so. Mr.
But
Childers.
I don't know that the holding tank is even an option for for a larger commercial use like this. So I think this ordinance solves a lot of it, but it's not going to really solve this particular situation. Now, we'll continue to do the research to see what options we have, but I really don't know that the holding tank is. You're dealing with a second situation too, whereas there was an old well out there. I can't tell you what the size of that well is, or even if that well would be large enough to accommodate for a new commercial building that most likely would have to be sprinkled. So I think there's also a water challenge from a utility standpoint on there, not that we're not far away, but I mean, if you were actually gonna try to put a new well, because you have a septic and a well, neither one which being allowed inside the city limits for these purposes. I think the ordinance could go forward and we'll still research that. The one thing that this ordinance also does, and I don't know that got talked a lot about tonight, but it's that one or the other situation. There was no opportunity for us to sign consents to annex for certain situations where you just had one or the other. You had to have both. And what this does is it allows us to utilize that tool and say, oh, okay, you can do the consent when you just have one, but the other one's a mile away, or you just have water and the sewer's a mile away. Now this allows for us, because there's some situations where they are compact contiguous on like all four sides. There's just nowhere near one utility or the other. So I want to point that out because that's a real important piece of this ordinance, is it allows for us to utilize that consent to annex form in a certainly more flexible or responsible way. So that really didn't come up a whole lot tonight, so I wanted to point that out. So,
Mr. Gardner.
Yeah, I just, agree with everything that Steve has said. This needs to go forward. It may not be a solution for the church, but it's a solution for the issue at hand. And at least we need to go forward with that and possibly do some more research like Eddie has said, but we need this right now.
Mr. Campbell.
So do I understand correctly that we don't necessarily need to pass it? We don't necessarily need to expedite it for the church tonight. But so do we need to expedite it for moving forward, or can we wait the 2 weeks?
We have another party on the north side of town that has, would like to be able to connect to the water system.
Okay.
They're a long ways away from the sewer system, but they would like to connect to the water system. So expediting this bill would help solve that situation.
Okay.
And getting the consent to annex with them as well.
That answers my.
Okay. We've got one that's on top of my mind.
Okay.
So this helps
I'm
solve
good.
that problem. It may not help solve the church's issue at hand, but it will help solve that issue.
All right.
Any other board comments, questions? Mr. Gardner.
I move that we adopt bill 3310, ordinance 21-096.
All right. Motion was made by Alderman Gardner, second by Alderman Campbell to adopt bill number 3310 as ordinance number 21-092. May I get a roll call vote, please?
Alderman Alder.
Aye.
Alderman Campbell.
Aye.
Alderman Flores is absent. Alderman Galloway.
Aye.
Alderman Gardner. Alderman Poston. We have 5 aye votes. Motion carries.
All right, perfect. Second reading of bills, final passage. Mr. Galloway, the floor is yours. 3306.
I move that we place bill number 3306 on its second reading by title only.
Motion was made by Alderman Galloway, seconded by Alderman Poston. Place bill number 3306 on its second reading by title and description only. All those in favor?
An ordinance authorizing the city to enter into a cost-share agreement for holiday lighting with Christian County and the Historic River District.
All right. Any other questions, comments with regards to this bill? Hearing none, Mr. Galloway.
I move we adopt 3306 as ordinance number 21-092.
Motion was made by Alderman Galloway, seconded by Alderman Poston to adopt bill number bill number 3306 is ordinance number 21-093. May I get a roll call vote, please?
Alderman Gardner. Alderman Alder. Alderman Poston. Alderman Galloway. Alderman Flores is absent. Alderman Campbell.
Aye.
We have 5 aye votes. Motion carries.
All right, Mr. Gardner, the floor is yours.
We put bill 3307 on the second reading by title.
Second.
Motion was made by Alderman Gardner, seconded by Alderman Galloway to place bill number 3307 on its second reading by title and description only. All those in favor?
An ordinance authorizing the city to enter into a contract with Norton Power Systems LLC for generator maintenance services.
All right. Did any of the board have any additional questions or comments with regards to this bill? Hearing none. Gardner?
Right, I move that we adopt bill 3307 as ordinance 21-094.
Second.
Motion was made by Alderman Gardner, seconded by Alderman Campbell to adopt bill number 3307 as ordinance number 21-094. May I get a roll call vote, please?
Alderman Flores is absent. Alderman Galloway.
Aye.
Alderman Poston. Alderman Gardner. Alderman Campbell.
Aye.
Alderman Alder. We have 5 aye votes. Motion carries.
All right, miscellaneous comments and report of officers, boards and committees. City Administrator, Mr. Childers.
Thank you. I mentioned last time that we were going to have a ribbon cutting on the 4th. We're going to postpone that ribbon cutting. We've had quite a bit of rain, and so, you know, we're still working towards the magic date of the Christmas parade. So Ms. Payne will let you know when that's been rescheduled for. We'll also have a Board of Alderman non-legislative session on the 18th. So we'll have another meeting on the 15th before our actual non-legislative session this time. Last time it was backwards. We had an extra one, but not this time around. So the next meeting on the 15th, and then, but that will be to basically look at our just two items on the agenda. That'll be a budget presentation, and so we can discuss that, as well as the future transportation, the next 5 years transportation projects list. So. That is the 18th, yeah. And that'll be here, not at the OC, back here, back at home. So that's all I had, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am, whatever you want.
All right, miscellaneous comments, boards, announcements. Anybody have anything, Mr. Gardner?
I've just got a question for the 2022 schedule for the non-legislative. Are they still going to continue being on the 3rd Thursday?
Would you like to move?
Nope. I just would like to plan ahead.
Plan ahead. I don't see any need to move.
Okay.
It works for
We
me.
haven't changed it but once this year, I think, but I just want to make sure that it's going to be the same.
Okay, we might,
Still works good for us.
Yeah. we may work a few extras in there from here and
that's
there so that we can, instead of having too many topics on one day and being pressed for time, that we can spread things out a little bit.
That's fine.
But other than that, I think we'll stay the same. Mr. Campbell.
I want to let Jeremy Parsons know that I read an editorial in the Christian County Headliner this week, or last week, I'm sorry. And it was very complimentary of you. And I want you to know that I'm on that bandwagon, and I think everybody here is. Did you read it? I think it was. Okay.
All right, any other comments from the board? All right, hearing none. Entertain a motion so some of you guys can go watch a football game. So move. All right, motion to adjourn, Mr. Galloway, seconded by Mr. Poston. All those in favor?